Welcome back, Chappelle. Welcome back to it. Welcome back, PB. Welcome back to your flipped classroom, and we're now going to start our next unit, right? We're picking up and starting our next unit. The big shout out to C and F period, who are the only people who are supposed to be watching this one right now. If you were in my B period, you're supposed to be watching the other one, okay? There are two of them that are posted online, and you need to do the B period label one, not the C period, F period label one, right? Okay, anyway, but big shout out to C period and F period. I'm looking over your chest, and they look really good so far, and I'll get them all posted over the break and stuff like that. Rah, 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 rah. Sorry, he really wants this football, but you can't have it. I tugged this out of the neighbor's trash. Now, anyway, so the big thing about it, though, it's an Endymion football. It's a good one. All right, so now look, you have to understand what we're doing right now. We're starting our next unit. I know, high five, we're starting our next unit, buddy. Yay! All right, so now the thing about it, though, is we're beginning a unit that you actually know a lot about already. We're beginning a unit right now. We're beginning a unit right now that you already have began discussing in Mr. Mathern's class, right? And it is about none other than the Reformation period, right? You have already started talking about that in Mr. Mathern's class when you're talking about your history of the church and stuff like that, the history of the Catholic Church, the thing that it's gone through. You began speaking about this with him already, okay? And I know you did because he is a saint in and of himself. Praise Gavin Mathern. I know. All right, so now, but what about it is that how does this relate to what we just got done talking about, right? How does the Reformation relate to the Renaissance? Thank you, poo-poo. I appreciate it. So, how does it relate to all this different stuff? I love you too. Good Lord. All right, so, now, so the thing about it, though, is the Reformation relates directly to the Renaissance, right? It relates directly to the Renaissance because it all hinges on this idea, right? Humanism and the idea of questioning, right? So the Renaissance hinged around the idea of humanism. Question the world around you. Question the secular world. Okay, you got to get down. All right, so question the secular world around you, understanding the world around you, and understanding why things exist the way that they do, right? This is going to lead to an explosion of art. It's going to lead to an explosion of economics. It's going to lead to an explosion of a lot of different things. But of course, the big thing is that's your Renaissance, right? But what's going to happen when people began to question the central force in their lives, right? What's going to happen when people start questioning the church, really? So what's going to happen there, right? Because there was some stuff going on in the Catholic Church during this time period that actually made them pretty corrupt. Now, it's important to understand that I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with the current Catholic Church, but we'll talk more on that later, right? So the thing that you need to understand, though, is that humanism during the 1500s, 1300s, and 1400s is going to lead to the idea of questioning societies, right? It's going to begin to lead to the idea of questioning institutions that have been around in Europe for a long, long time. Now, the church is one of them, and the church had been growing very, very powerful, very, very wealthy, and very, very intense, right? So something that you need to understand, though, as well, is that this is not new, right? The idea of questioning the faith and questioning the church is not something that actually is new or revolutionary in and of a sense. We talked about this once before, right? Remember when we talked about, or wait, excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself, right? But really quick, let's define the Reformation movement in and of itself, right? The Protestant Reformation is a movement that split the church in Western Europe that led to the creation of many new churches and denominations, right? What you need to do for me really, really quickly is you need to highlight that word, denominations, right? As this dog sits and lays on my chest. Now, the thing that you need to understand, though, in general, is that word denomination is going to be very, very important to the understanding of the Protestant Reformation. Tell them, PP, it is, right? It's going to be very important. Now, so the thing about it, though, is the Protestant Reformation is going to lead to the establishment of multiple new churches, and it's also going to lead to the establishment of a lot of new, very, very important figures throughout European history that we'll talk a lot about in this unit, including people like Martin Luther, John Calvin, Henry VIII, and all of his wives, right? We'll talk a lot about him as well. It's a lot of fun to talk about the 6 wives of Henry VIII, and then also about how he was a little bit weird, had a real big ulcery, gross leg that apparently smelled when he walked into a room. Now, we'll get there, though. So the big thing about it, though, in general, is that we need to understand something really, really quickly, okay? This word denomination is going to be very important because we have to understand what the difference between a religion is and a denomination, right? So a religion is an active, practicing idea of a faith or a church, right? And then also, and it can be anything. A religion can be like Hinduism, Catholicism, Christianity, Eastern Orthodoxy, Buddhism, Islam. Those are religions. Denomination is a word that's usually used to actually relate more to the idea of the multiple churches that are going to pop up under the Protestant faith, right? So looking at this, like I said earlier, before I kind of cut myself off, y'all, this isn't the first time that we've talked about a split in the church, right? The Protestant Reformation is just going to be a heavily different one because it's going to happen during the 1500s. It's going to actually affect us on the daily scale, right? For example, in the United States of America, there are more Protestants than there are Catholics, right? There are actually 42% of all practicing Christians in the United States, 42%. are Protestants, right? So like, whereas there's a much smaller minority of, not 42, excuse me, 42% of all people that actively practice religion of some type in the United States are Protestant Christians. I think it's like 23% are Catholics, right? So it's like half. So the thing about it, though, in general that you need to understand is, where did Protestantism come from? Where did it all start? And is it splitting in the church a new and unusual thing? Well, no. We've talked about a split in the church before, right? We talked about Christianity and how it existed, and it started in the Roman Empire with, like, of course, the preachings of Christ and stuff like that. He began his work when he was in his 30s. Well, his big work was in his 30s, right? And then he started, started from when he was young and did a lot of miracles and stuff like that, and flipped some tables, apparently, when he was younger. But the thing about it in general is that Christianity is going to begin under the Roman Empire, right? But then there's going to be a big event in 1053 that happened in the Byzantine Empire, known as the Great Schism, right? And the Great Schism is going to occur in 1053, and it's going to cause a split in the church, right? So we've seen splits before. It's not new and unusual, right? It's very, very kind of normal for us at this point, right? So, and it's going to go Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox, right? Now, we'll talk about Eastern Orthodoxy a little bit later, but it's primarily Eastern Europeans or Eastern Orthodox. Greeks, Russians, and people that live kind of between those two countries are primarily Eastern Orthodox, right? And like I said before, there's an Eastern Orthodox church, Greek Orthodox church, right over in City Park, at the corner of City Park and Allen Toussaint Boulevard, right there at the top corner of the park. The Greek church that holds Greek Fest every year. That's an Eastern Orthodox church, right? Well, the Roman Catholic Church is going to begin its active practicing focused in Rome in the 1050s, okay? Now, of course, during this time period, this is going to be the Middle Ages, okay? And they're going to begin to grow and prosper, and then they're going to collect tithes, and they're going to do all this other stuff, and they're going to be led by a pope, whereas the Eastern Orthodox Church is not. So then, in 1517, the Protestant Reformation is going to start, and it's going to lead to another split in the Roman Catholic Church, right? Whereas the Roman Catholic Church is still going to be around, but the church population that was all Catholic in Western Europe at that time is going to split into two new groups, right? You're going to get your Roman Catholics still. They're going to stay Roman Catholic. They are going to change some things, so it's important to understand that the church that kind of comes out of the Protestant Reformation is a little bit new and different, because it's going to be this thing called the Counter-Reformation, and the church is going to look very different from it did going into it and stuff like that. But then you're also going to have a new group of people called Protestants, right? And Protestants during the Protestant Reformation are going to begin to pop up all over the place, right? Now, you've heard of Protestant sects before if you've just lived and breathed in the United States, okay? You've seen them. You've interacted with them. You know that they're there, all right? For example, you got people like, don't write all these down, but this is just an example. Protestants are Christians that don't practice in the Catholic way that came out of Western Europe, right? So you got Lutherans, Pentecostals, Methodists, Baptists, Episcopalians, Seventh-day Adventists, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, different types of Calvinists as well. All of these different types of people, if you are a practicing Christian but not Catholic, you are usually referred to as a Protestant, right? So these right here, those different things, Lutherans, Pentecostals, Methodists, Baptists, Episcopalians, Mormonisms, all those things, those are denominations, okay? So it's something that you need to understand. What I'm getting at in this entire idea is explaining to you what a Protestant is, right? Because a lot of people think that Protestants aren't Christians, but they are, all right? So and when I say a lot of people, I mean people in predominantly Catholic cities, okay? So something that you need to understand is that being from New Orleans, okay, you are in a predominantly Catholic city, going to a Catholic school, you are predominantly surrounded by the Catholic faith, right? You have to understand that there are a lot more Protestants out there, right? There are, for example, I was raised Baptist, right? It has very different rules and very different guidelines than Catholic churches do, right? For example, in a Baptist church, you have to choose to be baptized when you're older, right? When you're in about 13, 14, 15, whereas in Catholic churches, you are usually baptized as a child, right? And actually in Europe during this time period in the 1500s, you were always baptized as a child in the Catholic Church, okay? So you have to understand, this movement is going to be climactic, it's going to be intense, it's going to be insanely very, very important going forward, but it's all going to break off the Catholic faith, right? And that's why you've been talking about it in Mr. Mathern's class. You talked about Martin Luther. You talked about Lutheranism. You talked about the expansion of the church. You talked about a lot of history of the church going all the way back to ancient Rome, right? I know y'all talked about Diocletian in this class as well. So the big thing about it, though, is you should know a lot about this already, and I know you do, and if you don't, it's not because of Mr. Mathern's class, it's because you haven't been paying attention, okay? So the thing about it in general, though, is what you need to understand is, why is this going to happen, right? Why is the Protestant Reformation going to explode during the 1500s? Well, a lot of it has to do with the fact that the church is falling subject to corruption, right? Now, corruption of the people inside of it, not the church itself, okay? So the church is falling subject to corruption during the Middle Ages, and it's going to carry over into the Renaissance as well. Now, some of y'all are probably asking yourself, well, corruption like what? What do you mean? Are you saying my church is corrupt? Real quick, before we go any further, a huge disclaimer that all of you should be directly listening to right now. In no way is Mr. Terry saying that the Catholic faith or the Catholic Church is corrupt in the modern era. What I am saying is that there are some things that went down in the 1500s, 1400s, and 1300s that were very corrupt and being led by corrupt people. Nothing wrong with the faith. The faith was completely fine. There was nothing wrong with the Bible. There was nothing wrong with what they were doing with it, okay? It had to do with the fact that there were some corrupt popes, some corrupt individuals, some corrupt governments that led people astray, and it's the fault of those individuals, not of the faith, okay? But those individuals are going to inspire other people to create new churches, like the ones we were just talking about, Protestant churches. And the big one, of course, that you learned about already in your class with Mr. Mathern is Martin Luther, right? Who's a German, priest and stuff like that. Ooh, was ist das? Ja, Deutsche. So now, going into it, though, let's talk about some of those examples of corruption that are going to inspire people like Luther to break off from the church and things like that, okay? It's very important that we understand that. But yeah, so there was several different examples of church corruption in the 1500s going forward, right? For example, you got big ones like papal supremacy, right? We talked about papal supremacy quite a bit when we were actually studying the growth of the church during the Middle Ages, right? Because popes are going to begin to get into political feuds with different kings and rulers and stuff like that. Bad popes are going to start running the papacy a lot like monarchs, okay? More like monarchs of states. They're going to wage war. They're going to tax people. They're going to lead really lavish lives and stuff like that. For example, Julius II is a really, really big one, which we'll talk about down here a little bit. And Julius is going to be a very heavy figure when we go over all this stuff. But Julius is the same pope that actually paid Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling. He actually would wage war and stuff like that, tax people very heavily, and do a lot of other different very, very corrupt things, right? And the guy also died from, syphilis, right? Which is, of course, something that kind of a red flag for a pope in general. Now, going into it, though, papal suprematic power as well, Julius was like a lot of these popes that came before him. He would oftentimes claim power over kings and other rulers, making himself much more like a political figure than a religious one, right? And remember, popes are supposed to be leading the faith, not leading a state where they actually believe that they have more power than other people, right? Now, going into it as well, there were a lot of other weird events, right? For example, there was this one in the 890s, right, in the early Middle Ages, called the Cadaver Synod, where it actually was an example of popes feuding with each other. There was actually a time in the in the early Middle Ages, when one pope put another pope's dead body on trial, right? So yeah, I'm not kidding. There were these two popes. One was named Pope Formosus. The other one was Stephen, I think. And he literally Pope Formosus' dead body on trial, right? As you can see, the pope right here accusing and pointing at the dead pope's body, saying, do you confess to the crimes that you have committed and stuff like that. Now, some of y'all probably, Taylor actually asked in class the other day, how does this dead pope body respond? They actually got a young deacon to sit behind the body and be like, yeah, I'm sorry, and actually talk for it and stuff like that. But it's stuff like that, right? Popes aren't supposed to be feuding with each other, and they're also not supposed to be feuding with each other's dead bodies, right? Which is really big. Also, after the trial was over, they actually cut off that dead pope's blessing fingers and drug his body through the streets of Rome and then hucked him into a river. But then people got really upset about it because they liked Pope Formosus a lot, and then Stephen actually ended up getting exiled. But the thing about it in general, though, is maybe we don't put dead bodies of other popes on trial by other popes, right? That's another example of church corruption, how things were getting kind of out of hand, right? That they're feuding and literally arguing with one another, even after they're already dead. Another big one, though, as well, was the Inquisition, right? We talked a lot about the Inquisition when we talked about the idea of trying people for heresy as if you were a political court and stuff like that, which is going to lead to torture and execution. One of the most famous people executed by an Inquisition was Joan of Arc, who was burned at the stake by the English Inquisition, trying to use her as a figure of non-holiness against another place at war, which is crazy because she's now canonized as a saint, and the English Inquisition burned her at the stake as a witch, right? So it's very big to understand that the Catholic Church was actually putting people to death during this time period, was torturing people during this time period, was hunting people down as witches during this time period and stuff like that. And there was another big one too, it was called the Spanish Inquisition. That actually happened in the late 1400s, right? Where the King Ferdinand and his wife Isabella are going to lead a massive campaign to actually try and crush Jewish populations and Muslim populations and run them out of Spain or force them to convert, which is absolutely wild, right? That's another thing as well of not being religiously tolerant and not being religiously progressive and stuff like that, which is an example of church corruption because they're just trying to curry favor of the church and grow their own power. Another crazy one as well was this thing known as the Great Western Schism or the Avignon Papacy, which we talked about during the Renaissance, which is actually going to be a time period where there are about 4 different popes all at once, right? So I kid you not, multiple popes all at once during the Great Western Western Schism, aka the Avignon Papacy, right? And this is absolutely wild because, again, these popes are feuding with each other and saying that, no, I'm the pope, no, I'm the pope, no, I'm the real pope, and stuff like that. And all the while these popes are feuding with each other and creating alignments and alliances throughout the entirety of Europe, leading to the brink of war in many cases, they're also collecting a ridiculous amount of money, and then also have priests and other people selling church offices under their nose, right? Now, this right here is an excerpt from Dante, okay? This is a little picture from Dante's Divine Comedy, and Dante is walking with Virgil through one of the lower levels of hell, and he actually sees people who have their bodies in flaming cauldrons with their feet poking out, and this is, of course, in the lower layers of hell, where demons would come up and stab their bare feet. Who are these people that are in these cauldrons? Well, they're priests, right? So even according to Dante, there was a corruption in the church. He wrote his book in the 1330s, right? And he actually was saying, oh, they're people that were accused of simony. Now, I know you learned this word in Mr. Mathern's class as well. There were priests selling church offices to make money for themselves, right? And there was also a big problem with nepotism, where rich families would enter into the papacy and elevate themselves forward throughout the entire hierarchy and become fabulously wealthy through the papacy and the church itself. And the other one was another one called pluralism. Pluralism was where priests held multiple offices and multiple jobs, but collected all of the money for it on their own. But yeah, so that's it right there. C and F period. Y'all are going to wrap up your flip right there. That's the one you have for this break. Make sure you study it because we do have a quiz coming back. But I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.